It arrived on the morning of my 58th birthday. A cream-colored envelope with no return address, no stamp, just my name written in a handwriting I hadn't seen in nearly 20 years. Nathan. The letters curved and slanted in that distinctive way that made my heart stop. I almost missed it among the utility bills and grocery flyers that had been pushed through the mail slot. But there it was, waiting like a ghost from the past. Impossible, yet undeniable. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I stood frozen in my entryway, the other mail forgotten on the side table as I stared at the envelope between my trembling fingers. The morning sunlight streamed through the stained glass panels of my front door, casting prisms of color across my hands, but I felt suddenly cold. My throat tightened as I traced the letters of my name, each one achingly familiar. Nathan had disappeared in 2005. His car was found abandoned near Willow Creek Bridge, his wallet and phone still inside. The police dragged the water for weeks, but never found a body. Everyone believed he had jumped. Everyone except me, at least at first. I carried the envelope to the kitchen, set it on the counter, and stared at it while I made coffee I knew I wouldn't drink. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from Nathan's parents that had outlasted their son and their marriage. Finally, I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out a simple birthday card with watercolor peonies on the front, my favorite flower. Inside, written in the same careful script as the envelope, were 9 words that shattered the careful peace I'd built over 2 decades. Happy birthday, Alice, I never left. Look in the basement. The card fell from my hands and fluttered to the tile floor. I gripped the edge of the counter, suddenly dizzy, the room spinning around me as 20 years of grief, anger, and carefully constructed closure threatened to collapse. I hadn't been in the basement in years. It was where Nathan had spent most of his time before he vanished. His project room, he called it, though he never showed me what he was working on. I moved to the hall mirror, half expecting to see a different woman reflected back at me, younger, more broken. But it was just me, Alice Winters, silver-streaked auburn hair pulled back in a loose bun, crow's feet deepening around green eyes that had seen too much. I was no longer the woman Nathan had left behind, yet here was his handwriting, reaching through time to claim me again. This isn't happening, I whispered to my reflection. It's a cruel prank. But who would play such a joke? My sister lived overseas. My closest friend Diana had moved to Arizona years ago. My daughter Lydia was finishing her surgical residency in Boston and barely had time to call, let alone orchestrate something so elaborate and cruel. And no one else remembered the anniversary of Nathan's disappearance. No one else cared. I picked up the card again, studying every loop and curve. It was his handwriting, I was certain. Nathan had a peculiar way of crossing his T's with a slight upward flick and making his lowercase e's with an extra loop. These weren't details a forger would know. These weren't details anyone would know but me. I walked to the basement door at the end of the hall, my hand hovering over the tarnished brass knob. The last time I'd gone down there was to clear out some of Nathan's things 5 years after he disappeared, when I finally accepted he wasn't coming back. I'd boxed up his electronics, his books, his half-finished projects, and donated most of it. The space had sat mostly empty since then, just a few holiday decorations and old photo albums I couldn't bear to look at, but couldn't bring myself to throw away. What did he mean? Look in the basement? Was it a metaphor? A final, cryptic message? From beyond the grave? Or was it something else entirely? My hand trembled as I turned the knob. The door creaked open, revealing the darkened stairwell beyond. I flipped the light switch, but the bulb had burned out long ago. Of course it had. I grabbed my phone from my pocket and turned on the flashlight, illuminating the steep wooden steps descending into shadow. As I took the first step down, the wood groaning beneath my weight, I knew with absolute certainty that whatever I found in the basement would rewrite everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and the man I had mourned for almost 20 years. In 1999, if you had asked me to describe my life, I would have called it blessed. Charmed, even. I was 32 years old with a successful career as a landscape architect, married to Nathan Winters, a brilliant software engineer who looked at me like I hung the moon. We lived in a sprawling Victorian house in the historic district of Mapleton, Massachusetts, complete with a wraparound porch where we'd drink lemonade in summer and hot chocolate in winter, watching the world go by from our swing. Nathan was the kind of man who remembered anniversaries without reminders, who brought home wildflowers because they reminded him of me, who could fix anything from a leaky faucet to a crashed computer. He had this infectious laugh that started deep in his chest and bubbled up until everyone around him was laughing too, even if they didn't know what was funny. He wore reading glasses that perpetually slid down his nose, and he had a habit of absently pushing them back up with his knuckle while he was thinking, a gesture I found endlessly endearing. We had our daughter, Lydia, when I was 25. She was the perfect blend of us, Nathan's analytical mind and my creative spirit, his dark curls and my green eyes. By the time she was in middle school, she was already talking about becoming a doctor, dissecting frogs in science class with a precision that both impressed and slightly terrified her teachers. Our life had a comfortable rhythm to it. Weekday mornings began with Nathan making coffee while I packed Lydia's lunch. He'd kiss me goodbye, a quick peck that often turned into something more, making me blush and Lydia groan dramatically. "Gross, Mom and Dad. I'm right here." But I could see her small smile as she pretended to be disgusted. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Saturdays were for farmers markets and yard work. Nathan would trim the hedges while I tended my elaborate garden beds. Sundays were for pancake breakfasts and board games, often with Nathan's brother Michael and his wife joining us. We were that family, the one others looked at with a mixture of admiration and perhaps a touch of envy. We were solid, unshakable. Nathan and I rarely argued. When we did, it was over small things. His tendency to leave wet, towels on the bathroom floor, my habit of starting projects and abandoning them halfway through. We never went to bed angry. That was our rule. No matter how frustrated we were, we'd talk it out, sometimes into the early hours of the morning, but always finding our way back to each other. "That's what marriage is," Nathan would say, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "Not never fighting, but always choosing to stay." I believed him. I believed in us, in the permanence of what we'd built together. Looking back, I wonder if that was my first mistake, believing that love alone was enough to keep someone tethered to this world, to a life they no longer wanted. But that's getting ahead of the story. The first real crack appeared in the spring of 2004. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting matches, no evidence of an affair, no sudden personality change. It was subtler than that, a slow erosion rather than a collapse. Nathan started spending more time in the basement. He'd always had projects, building computers, tinkering with old radios, creating elaborate electronic systems for the house that never quite worked right. But these new projects were different. He was secretive about them. When I'd ask what he was working on, he'd shrug and say, "Just some stuff for work," or "nothing interesting." He began coming to bed later and later. I'd fall asleep alone and wake to find him already gone, a depression in the pillow the only evidence he'd been there at all. When I mentioned it, he blamed a new project at work, something about enhanced security protocols that required odd hours. "The servers are less busy at night," he explained, not quite meeting my eyes. "It's easier to run the tests when there's less traffic." I believed him because I had no reason not to. Nathan had never lied to me before, at least not that I knew of. Then came the phone calls. They always seemed to happen when I was in another room. I'd walk into the kitchen to find Nathan with his back to me, his voice low and urgent. "I can't talk about this now," he'd say, or, "We'll figure it out. Just give me more time." When he'd notice me, he'd end the call abruptly, offering a tight smile and an explanation that never quite satisfied. "Work stuff," he'd say. "You know how it is." And I did know how it was with Nathan's work. As a senior security specialist for a major tech company, there were aspects of his job he couldn't discuss with me. Confidentiality agreements, corporate secrets. I told myself that's all it was. But there were other changes too. Nathan, who had always been attentive and affectionate, grew distant. His kisses became perfunctory, his embrace less lingering. When I'd reach for his hand while watching TV, he'd hold it for a moment before finding a reason to get up, to grab a drink, check on something in the basement, answer an email. He lost weight, his face growing gaunt, dark circles forming under his eyes. When I expressed concern, he dismissed it. "Just stress," he'd say. "This project is kicking my ass." I suggested a vacation, thinking some time away might help him relax, reconnect. He agreed too quickly, almost with relief, but then kept finding reasons to postpone. His team needed him. The deadline was moved up. There was a security breach they were dealing with. Always something. The most telling moment came on our 15th wedding anniversary in June 2004. I had made reservations at Callahan's, the upscale restaurant where we'd celebrated every major milestone since moving to Mapleton. I bought a new dress, midnight blue with a sweetheart neckline, and splurged on a professional blowout. I even wore the pearl earrings Nathan had given me on our 10th anniversary, earrings I usually kept tucked away for special occasions. I was ready by 6, perfumed and expectant, waiting in the living room with a small wrapped gift. A vintage watch I'd found at an antique store, similar to one his grandfather had owned. Our reservation was for 7. At 6:30, I texted Nathan. No response. At 6:45, I called, straight to voicemail. By 7:15, I had called the restaurant to push back our reservation. By 8:00, I had kicked off my heels and was pacing the kitchen. By 9:00, I was sitting on the couch in the dark, the wrapped gift beside me, fighting back tears of hurt and confusion. Nathan walked in at 9:30, looking distracted and tired. He stopped short when he saw me sitting there in my fancy dress, mascara smudged beneath my eyes. "Alice," he said, and I could tell from his tone that he had forgotten, completely forgotten, our anniversary. "I'm sorry," he continued, running a hand through his hair. "I got caught up at work. There was an emergency with the firewall and It's our anniversary," I interrupted, my voice flat. 15 years, Nathan." He closed, his eyes briefly, his face crumpling with what looked like genuine remorse. "God, I'm an idiot. I'm so sorry, Al. I completely lost track of the date." I wanted to be angry, to shout and throw things, but the defeated slump of his shoulders disarmed me. He looked so tired, so unlike the vibrant man I had married. Instead of rage, I felt a creeping fear. Something was wrong with my husband, something he wasn't telling me. "What's going on with you?" I asked softly. "And please don't say work or stress. It's more than that. I know it is." Nathan sat beside me on the couch, leaving a careful distance between us. He stared at his hands for a long moment before speaking. "I don't know how to explain it," he finally said. "I feel disconnected from everything, like I'm watching my life through a glass wall. I go through the motions, but I can't seem to feel anything." A chill ran through me. "Are you saying you don't love me anymore?" "No." His response was immediate, his eyes meeting mine for the first time that evening. That's not it at all. I love you. I love Lydia. That's the one thing I'm sure of. But something's wrong with me, Al. I don't know what it is or how to fix it. I reached for his hand, relief washing through me. Depression. That's what this was. Not an affair, not a midlife crisis. Something medical, something we could address. We'll get you help, I said firmly. We'll find a therapist, a doctor, whatever you need. He nodded, squeezing my hand, but there was something in his eyes I couldn't read. Something that looked almost like resignation. Yeah, he said. We'll figure it out. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. So I pushed aside the small voice that whispered he wasn't telling me everything. I focused instead on solutions, researching therapists, suggesting meditation, buying books on depression and anxiety. Nathan went along with it all, dutifully attending therapy sessions and taking the antidepressants his doctor prescribed. For a while, things seemed to improve. He came to bed earlier. He remembered to ask about my day. He made an effort to spend more time with Lydia, helping her with science projects and taking her to the movies on weekends. But there was still something off, something not quite right. The basement visits continued, the mysterious phone calls, the moments when I'd catch him staring into space, a look of profound sadness on his face that would vanish the instant he noticed me watching. I told myself it was the depression. Recovery wasn't linear. There would be good days and bad days. We just needed to be patient. Then came Thanksgiving 2004. We were hosting, as we did every year, a full spread for Nathan's brother and his wife, my sister and her husband, and a few close friends. I had been cooking for days, determined to make it perfect. Nathan had seemed better that week, more present, even helping with the preparations without being asked. The meal itself was lovely. Golden turkey, cranberry sauce made from scratch, my grandmother's secret recipe for stuffing. Everyone was in good spirits, the conversation flowing as easily as the wine. Even Nathan seemed more like his old self, telling jokes and engaging with our guests. It wasn't until dessert that things went sideways. Michael, Nathan's brother, raised his glass for a toast. To Alice, he said, smiling warmly at me, for this incredible feast and for being the rock that keeps this family grounded. Everyone raised their glasses. To Alice. I blushed, pleased and embarrassed by the attention. Then Michael turned to Nathan. And to my brother, he continued, for being smart enough to marry her before I had the chance. It was an old joke. Between them, harmless and familiar. Nathan usually responded with a quip about being the smarter brother for once, but this time, his smile faltered. He raised his glass mechanically, took a sip, and then set it down with a sharp clink that drew every eye at the table. "Excuse me," he said, pushing back his chair. "I need some air." He walked out, leaving a bewildered silence behind him. Michael looked at me, confusion and hurt in his eyes. Did I say something wrong? I shook my head, already rising to follow. Nathan. No, it's not you. It's been a tough year. Let me check on him. I found him on the front porch, leaning against the railing, staring out at nothing. The November air was biting, but he hadn't bothered to grab a jacket. Nathan? I approached cautiously. What happened in there? He didn't turn around. I can't do this anymore, Alice. My heart stuttered. Do what? The dinner? We're almost done. Just dessert left. No. His voice was hollow. This, all of it. The pretending. Pretending what? I moved beside him, trying to see his face, but he kept his gaze fixed straight ahead. That I'm okay, that I'm getting better. He finally looked at me, and the emptiness in his eyes terrified me. I'm not. The therapy, the pills, none of it is working. I still feel like I'm drowning, every single day. I reached for his hand, but he pulled away. I'm failing you, he continued. I'm failing Lydia. I'm failing at work. I can see it in everyone's eyes. The disappointment, the worry. Michael's toast it highlighted everything I'm not anymore. Everything I can't seem to be. That's not true, I insisted, fighting back tears. We love you. We just want you to be well. But what if I can't be? He asked, his voice breaking. What if this is just who I am now? I didn't have an answer for that. Instead, I stepped closer and wrapped my arms around him, holding on tight even when he remained stiff and unresponsive. Eventually, his arms came up to return the embrace, and we stood there in the cold, clinging to each other like survivors of a shipwreck. We'll figure it out, I whispered into his shoulder. Whatever it takes. He nodded against my hair, but I could feel the lack of conviction in his body, the way he held himself apart even in my arms. We went back inside eventually, making excuses about Nathan not feeling well. Our guests left soon after, the festive mood thoroughly dampened. As I cleaned up the kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted, that we had crossed some invisible line and couldn't go back. I was right, though I didn't know yet how right I was. That Thanksgiving was the beginning of the end, the first clear warning that I chose to interpret as just another bad day in a series of bad days. I still believed we could weather this storm, that our love was strong enough to survive whatever darkness had taken hold of Nathan. I didn't realize then that some storms don't pass. They just gather strength, building toward a devastation that leaves nothing but wreckage in their wake. The months following Thanksgiving were a slow-motion collapse. Nathan retreated further into himself, spending most evenings in the basement with the door locked. When he did emerge, he was like a ghost, present in body but absent in every way that mattered. Conversations became one-sided. Intimacy evaporated entirely. I tried everything I could think of to reach him. I arranged date nights that he would agree to and then cancel at the last minute. I left love notes in his laptop, bag that went unacknowledged. I even suggested marriage counseling, which he flatly refused. "This isn't about us, Alice," he said with a weariness that broke my heart. "This is about me. I'm the problem, not you, not our marriage. But a marriage isn't made of separate, isolated parts. When one person changes, the relationship changes too. And ours was changing into something I barely recognized. Lydia noticed, of course. She was 16, perceptive, and increasingly worried about her father. She'd try to engage him, showing him her science fair projects or asking for help with calculus problems, activities they'd always bonded over. Sometimes he'd make an effort, sitting with her at the kitchen table, patiently explaining equations. But his heart wasn't in it, and Lydia knew it. One night in February, she came to my bedroom after Nathan had once again retreated to the basement. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her voice small in a way it hadn't been since she was much younger. "Is Dad going to leave us?" she asked bluntly. The question knocked the wind out of me. "What?" "No, honey. Why would you think that?" She gave me a look that was far too knowing for her age. "Because he's already gone, Mom. Not physically, but—" "He's not here anymore, not really." I wanted to refute this, to offer reassurances that everything would be fine. But I couldn't lie to her. Not about this. "Dad is going through something difficult right now," I said carefully. "Depression can make people seem distant, even from the people they love most. But he's getting help, and he loves us very much. That hasn't changed." Lydia nodded, but the worry didn't leave her eyes. "I'm scared for him," she admitted. "He looks at me sometimes like he's trying to memorize my face, like he's saying goodbye." A chill ran through me at her words, but I pushed the feeling aside. "He's not going anywhere," I insisted, pulling her into a hug. "We're going to get through this as a family." I believed what I was saying. I had to. The alternative was too frightening to contemplate. March brought a brief reprieve, Nathan seemed to rally, emerging from his depression enough to suggest a weekend trip to the coast, just the three of us, like old times. I was so pathetically grateful for this small gesture that I immediately agreed, rearranging my work schedule and helping Lydia get ahead on her schoolwork so she wouldn't fall behind. Those 3 days in Rockport were like a mirage. Beautiful. Seemingly real, but ultimately insubstantial. Nathan smiled more, laughed even. He held my hand as we walked along the beach. He took Lydia to a bookstore and bought her 3 new science books she'd been wanting. We ate seafood at quaint restaurants and stayed up late playing cards in our rented cottage. On the last night, after Lydia had gone to bed, Nathan and I sat on the porch swing, watching the moonlight play across the water. He put his arm around me, and I leaned into him, savoring the familiar weight and warmth of his body next to mine. "Thank you for this weekend," I said softly. "It's been wonderful." He kissed the top of my head. "I'm sorry, Alice, for everything these past months. You don't need to apologize for being depressed, Nathan. That's not something you can control." He was quiet for a long moment. "There are some things I need to take care of when we get home," he finally said. "Some loose ends to tie up. Then things will be better. I promise." I looked up at him, hope blooming in my chest. "Really?" He nodded, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Really?" I kissed him then, and he kissed me back with an intensity that had been missing for months. That night, we made love for the first time since the previous summer, and I fell asleep in his arms believing that we had turned a corner, that the worst was behind us. I was wrong, so catastrophically wrong. We returned home on Sunday evening, and by Monday morning, Nathan had retreated back to his basement, back to his silence. The connection I thought we'd reestablished crumbled like sand through my fingers. When I confronted him, confused and hurt, he wouldn't meet my eyes. "I just need a little more time," he said. "There are things I need to finish." "What things?" I demanded, frustration finally overtaking my patience. "What are you doing down there all day and night?" "It's complicated," he replied, the vagueness of his answer infuriating. "Just trust me, Alice, please." But my trust was wearing thin. That night, while Nathan was in the shower, I took his phone and scrolled through his messages, something I'd never done before. I found nothing suspicious, no evidence of an affair or any other betrayal. His call history showed mostly work, numbers and a few to Michael, but there was one number that appeared repeatedly, always with calls lasting only a minute or two. No name was attached to it. I was about to look further when I heard the shower turn off. I quickly replaced the phone and left the bedroom, my heart racing with guilt and uncertainty. I had crossed a line, violated his privacy, and for what? I still had no answers, just more questions. April brought rain, endless days of it falling, from a leaden sky, turning our garden into a sodden mess and matching my increasingly bleak mood. Nathan's behavior grew more erratic. Some days he was almost his old self, attentive, engaged, present. Other days he barely acknowledged my existence, moving through the house like a man sleepwalking. The basement remained his sanctuary and my growing obsession. What was he doing down there? Several times I tried to go down while he was at work, only to find the door locked. I couldn't find the key anywhere. When I asked him about it, he brushed me off. "Just some work projects. I need to keep secure," he said. "Company policy." But Nathan had never brought work projects home before, at least not physical ones. His work was all digital, code and algorithms. What could he possibly have in the basement that needed to be locked away? I began to have trouble sleeping, lying, awake long after Nathan had gone downstairs for the night, imagining all sorts of scenarios. Was he gambling online? Involved in something illegal? Having virtual affairs? The possibilities multiplied in the darkness, each more outlandish than the last. Lydia withdrew too, spending more time at friends' houses or shut in her room with her books. The vibrant, chatty girl who used to fill our dinner table with stories from school had become quiet and watchful, observing the growing distance between her parents with wary eyes. One evening in early May, I came home from work early, a migraine pounding behind my eyes. The house was quiet, which wasn't unusual. Nathan's car was in the driveway, so I assumed he was in the basement as usual. I took some medication and lay down in our bedroom, pulling the blackout curtains closed against the late afternoon sun. I must have fallen asleep because I woke to voices downstairs. Nathan's and someone else's. A woman, her tone urgent but too low for me to make out the words. Curious and a little alarmed, Nathan never brought anyone to the house anymore. I got up and moved quietly to the top of the stairs. "Can't keep putting this off," the woman was saying. "They're getting suspicious. If you don't move soon—" "I know," Nathan interrupted, his voice tense. "But I need more time. I haven't figured out how to." "There are complications." "Your family," the woman said, not unkindly. "I understand, but—" "No, you don't understand," Nathan cut in. "You can't possibly understand what I'm asking." "Them to give up." "What I'm giving up." There was a pause, and then the woman sighed. "2 more weeks, Nathan. That's all I can give you. After that, with or without you, we have to proceed." "I'll be ready," Nathan said, but I heard the uncertainty in his voice. I retreated to the bedroom, my mind racing. Who was this woman? What were they planning? What did she mean, with or without you? It sounded like Nathan was involved in something dangerous, something that might take him away from us. When I heard the front door close, I waited a few minutes before going downstairs. Nathan was in the kitchen, staring out the window, his posture rigid with tension. "Who was that?" I asked from the doorway. He startled, turning to face me with wide eyes. "Alice, I thought you were at work." "I came home early. Migraine." I stepped further into the kitchen. "Who was here, Nathan?" He hesitated, just for a second, but long enough for me to know he was formulating a lie. "Just a colleague. Catherine, from IT. We're collaborating on a project." "In our house? You never bring work colleagues here." "It was an emergency," he said, moving to the refrigerator, keeping his back to me. "The servers went down, and we needed to access some backup files I keep here." "In the basement," I said flatly. He nodded, still not looking at me. "In the basement." I knew he was lying. I knew it with a certainty that made my chest ache. But I also knew he wouldn't tell me the truth. Not now, maybe not ever. "I'm going to start dinner," I said, moving past him to the pantry. "Lydia's staying at Emma's tonight, so it's just us." Nathan nodded again, relief evident in the slight relaxation of his shoulders. He thought I had accepted his explanation, that I would continue to ignore the gaping holes in our relationship, the growing canyon between us, and I let him think that. Because some part of me still hoped that if I just gave him enough time, enough space, enough love, he would find his way back to me, to us. But as I mechanically prepared a meal I had no appetite for, I couldn't shake the woman's words from my mind. 2 more weeks. Whatever Nathan was involved in, whatever secret he was keeping, it was coming to a head. And soon. I just didn't know then that soon meant sooner than I could have ever imagined. That in less than a month, my husband would vanish without a trace, leaving me with nothing but questions and a grief so profound it would shape the rest of my life. Until a cream-colored envelope arrived on my 58th birthday, bearing 9 words. That would shatter everything I thought I knew. I descended the basement stairs one careful step at a time, my phone's flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. Each creak of the wooden steps seemed impossibly loud in the silence. My heart hammered against my ribs as I reached the concrete floor, cool and slightly damp beneath my bare feet. The basement looked much as I remembered it. Bare walls, exposed pipes, a few plastic storage bins stacked in the corner. Nathan's old workbench stood against the far wall, its surface empty save for a fine layer of dust. I swept my light across the room, searching for anything unusual, anything that might explain the card's cryptic message. Nothing seemed out of place. No hidden doors, no mysterious packages, no signs that anyone had been here recently. Just the hollow remnants of a life interrupted. I was about to turn back, convinced the message was either a cruel joke or a metaphorical directive rather than a literal one, when my light caught something unusual on the wall behind the workbench. A slight discoloration in the paint, almost imperceptible unless you were looking for it. I moved closer, pushing the heavy bench aside with effort. Up close, I could see it clearly, a thin rectangular outline, about 2 feet high and 3 feet wide. I ran my fingers along the edge, feeling a slight depression, a hidden panel. My hands trembled as I pressed against different spots, trying to find a mechanism to open it. Nothing budged. I stepped back, frustrated and increasingly certain that whatever Nathan had hidden here, he hadn't intended for it to be easily found. I scanned the workbench and the surrounding area, looking for anything that might serve as a key or tool. In the corner, partially hidden behind a support beam, I spotted Nathan's old toolbox. I dragged it out and rifled through the jumbled contents. Screwdrivers, wrenches, measuring tape, a level, and a small pry bar. I hesitated only a moment before wedging the flat end into the nearly invisible seam and applying pressure. The panel resisted at first, then gave way with a sudden pop that made me stumble backward. It swung open to reveal a small cavity in the wall. Inside was a metal lockbox. I stared at it, frozen in place. Part of me wanted to slam the panel shut, push the workbench back, and pretend I'd never found it. But I'd come too far to turn back now. With shaking hands, I lifted the box out of its hiding place. It was surprisingly heavy and locked with a combination dial. I sat cross-legged on the floor, the box in my lap, considering my options. I could try to break it open, but that might damage whatever was inside. I could take it to a locksmith, but the thought of involving a stranger in this deeply personal mystery felt wrong. Instead, I tried the most obvious combination first, Lydia's birthday, 07-22-88. The lock didn't budge. Then I tried our anniversary, 06-12-89. Nothing. Nathan's. Birthday, my birthday, the day we met. All unsuccessful. I was about to give up when a memory surfaced. On our honeymoon in Bermuda, we'd spent an entire day on a secluded beach Nathan had discovered while exploring on a rented scooter. We'd nicknamed it Sanctuary Cove because it felt like our private paradise, hidden from the rest of the world. For years afterward, it became our code word for moments of perfect happiness. That was a Sanctuary Cove kind of day. On a hunch, I tried 05-14-89, the date we'd found that beach. The lock clicked open. Inside the box lay several items carefully arranged: a thick manila envelope, a small velvet jewelry pouch, a USB drive, and a sealed letter with my name written on it in Nathan's handwriting. My throat tightened as I lifted the letter, turning it over in my hands. Whatever answers I sought, they likely began here. I broke the seal and unfolded 2 pages of Nathan's neat, precise handwriting. My dearest Alice, if you're reading this, then you've found the card I arranged to have delivered on your birthday, and you've solved the first puzzle. I always loved that about you. Your persistence, your refusal to leave questions unanswered. I'm counting on that quality now. I owe you an explanation, though I know no explanation could ever be sufficient for what I've done to you and Lydia. The simple truth is that I didn't disappear by choice, at least, not entirely. The complexity of what happened has haunted me every day we've been apart. The work I was doing at Helios Tech wasn't what I told you it was. Yes, I was involved in security systems, but at a level I never disclosed. My team was developing surveillance software for government use, software that could track individuals through any digital footprint. We believed we were creating tools for national security, for catching terrorists and preventing attacks. Then I discovered that our software was being sold to regimes known for human rights violations, used to track and capture political dissidents. When I confronted my superiors, I was told to mind my own business. When I threatened to go public, the threats began, first subtly, then explicitly, not just against me, but against you and Lydia. I was watched constantly. Our house was bugged. Yes, even as you're reading this, they may still be listening. The depression you witnessed was real, but its cause wasn't chemical. It was the weight of knowing I had helped create something monstrous, and the fear of what would happen to our family because of it. The woman you overheard that day was Catherine, yes, but not from IT. She was from a government agency I can't name, helping me arrange my extraction. My death was the only way to ensure your safety. As long as I disappeared with all evidence of my knowledge, they had no reason to harm you or Lydia. You were civilians, unaware of what I had been involved in. I've spent these years hiding, working under different names, always moving, but I've never stopped watching over you from afar, making sure you were safe. The enclosed USB drive contains evidence of everything I've told you, along with accounts I've established for you and Lydia. The jewelry pouch holds my wedding ring. I've never taken it off until now. In the manila envelope, you'll find documentation of where I am and how to find me if you choose to. I won't blame you if you don't. What I did was unforgivable, regardless of my reasons. I never stopped loving you, Alice. Not for a single day. You were my sanctuary in a world that turned out to be far darker than I ever imagined. Always yours, Nathan. I read the letter 3 times, my mind struggling to process its implications. Nathan hadn't committed suicide. He hadn't abandoned us out of depression or for another woman. He had been involved in something dangerous and believed he was protecting us by disappearing. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as an elaborate fiction, a way to justify his abandonment. But another part, the part that had known Nathan better than anyone, recognized the ring of truth. In his words, it explained so much: his withdrawal, the secrecy, the locked basement, the mysterious phone calls. With trembling fingers, I opened the velvet pouch and tipped its contents into my palm. Nathan's wedding band gleamed in the flashlight's beam. Platinum with a small row of channel-set diamonds, my grandmother's emerald serving as the centerpiece. I had designed it myself, working with a jeweler to create something that represented our unique bond. It was unmistakably his. I slipped the ring onto my thumb, feeling its weight, both physical and emotional. Then I picked up the USB drive, turning it over in my hand. It contained evidence, Nathan claimed, proof of his story. But did I want to see it? Did I want to know the full truth after all these years? The manila envelope seemed to pulse with possibility. Documentation of where Nathan was now. A map to the man I had mourned for almost 2 decades. I could find him, confront him, demand the closure I'd been denied. Or I could put everything back in the lockbox, seal up the wall, and continue the life I'd built from the ashes of his disappearance. A life that was, if not happy, at least stable, predictable, safe. I sat in the basement darkness for what felt like hours, weighing my options, the letter clutched in my hand. Finally, I made my decision. I gathered the items, closed the lockbox but didn't lock it, and carried everything upstairs. The kitchen clock read 2:17 a.m. I made coffee, knowing sleep was impossible now. Then I inserted the USB drive into my laptop and began reading. What I found confirmed Nathan's story in horrifying detail. Internal emails about software called Panopticon being sold to authoritarian regimes. Financial records showing millions flowing through shell companies. surveillance photos of Nathan entering and leaving our house, transcripts of our private conversations that could only have been obtained through hidden listening devices. Most disturbing were the veiled threats, buried in seemingly innocuous corporate communications. References to protecting family interests and ensuring domestic assets remain secure. One email specifically mentioned Lydia's college applications, information that should have been private. By the time dawn broke, painting the kitchen in pale gold light, I had a clearer picture of what Nathan had been facing. His fear had been justified. His choice, while devastating, wasn't made lightly or selfishly. But that didn't erase 20 years of grief and unanswered questions. It didn't undo the damage to Lydia, who had grown up believing her father chose to leave her. It didn't heal the broken trust or restore the years we'd lost. I closed the laptop and stared out the window at my garden, now overgrown with spring, wildflowers I hadn't had the heart to tame. Like my life, it had found its own way without careful tending, beautiful in its wildness, but nothing like the manicured paradise it once was. The manila envelope still sat unopened on the table. I wasn't ready yet. I needed time to process what I'd learned, to decide what to do with this knowledge that had the power to upend my carefully reconstructed existence. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, and spent the day in a fog, moving from room to room in the house that suddenly felt full of ghosts. Nathan's ghosts. Our ghosts. The family we might have been if circumstances had been different. That evening, I called Lydia. Her voice, warm and slightly distracted, anchored me to the present. "Mom? Everything okay? You never call this late." I hadn't planned what to say. How could I tell my daughter that the father she had mourned wasn't dead after all? That he had chosen to disappear to protect us? That everything we thought we knew about our family history was built on carefully constructed lies? "I'm fine," I said instead. "Just missing you. How's the residency going?" She launched into a story about a challenging surgery she'd assisted with, her voice animated with the passion she'd always had for medicine. I listened, treasuring her excitement, her normalcy. I couldn't disrupt that, not yet. Not until I was certain of what I wanted to do. "You sure you're okay, Mom?" she asked when she finally paused for breath. "You seem, I don't know, distracted." "Just tired," I assured her, "and proud of you, so incredibly proud." After we hung up, I sat on the porch swing Nathan and I had installed together the summer before he vanished. The night was clear, stars scattered across the velvet sky. The same stars, I thought, that Nathan might be looking at right now, wherever he was. The idea that he was alive, breathing, thinking, existing somewhere in the world, was still surreal. For 20 years, I had pictured him at the bottom of Willow Creek, his body caught in underwater debris or carried out to sea. I had visualized his last moments, imagined his despair as he jumped from the bridge. Now I had to reimagine everything. Nathan walking away from his car, perhaps meeting someone who helped him disappear. Nathan establishing a new identity, building a new life. Nathan watching us from afar, as his letter claimed. Had he been at Lydia's college graduation? Her white coat ceremony when she started medical school? Had he seen me in the garden, or shopping at the farmer's market, or walking alone on the anniversary of his disappearance? The thought made me shiver despite the mild spring air. I went inside and retrieved the manila envelope from the kitchen table. Whatever it contained, I needed to know. Continuing in ignorance was no longer an option. Inside were several documents: a detailed map of a small coastal town in Nova Scotia, property records for a house purchased by someone named Daniel Winters, recent photographs of a bearded man who, despite the changes wrought by time, was unmistakably Nathan, and a handwritten note with a phone number. "When you're ready. If you're ready. N." I stared at the phone number until the digits blurred before my eyes. He was in Canada, just a day's drive away, living under a name that still connected him to me. He had kept my last name, Winters, while changing his first to Daniel. The realization hit me with unexpected force. Despite everything, some part of Nathan had never let go of us, of me. I didn't call the number that night, or the next. I needed time to sort through the tangle of emotions his revelation had unleashed. Relief that he was alive, anger at his deception, confusion about his motives, and underneath it all, a persistent ache that felt dangerously like longing. Instead, I began researching Nova Scotia, learning about the small fishing village where Nathan apparently lived now. I studied the photographs, noting the changes in him, the beard streaked with gray, the deeper lines around his eyes, the slightly stooped posture that spoke of years carrying a heavy burden. For 20 years, I had been suspended in grief, unable to fully move forward. Even my attempts at new relationships had failed, sabotaged by the ghost of a man I couldn't forget. Now that ghost had substance again, and I didn't know if that made things better or infinitely more complicated. A week after finding the lockbox, I made a decision. I would go to Nova Scotia. Not to reconcile with Nathan. I couldn't even imagine what that would look like after so much time and deception. But to look him in the eye and hear the full truth directly from him. I needed that closure, that confirmation, before I could decide what came next. I booked a flight to Halifax and arranged to rent a car for the drive to the coastal village. I packed lightly, just enough for a few days, and left a message for Lydia saying I was taking a short trip to clear my head. I didn't tell her where I was going or why. That conversation would have to wait until I had more answers. The journey felt surreal, like I was moving through a dream. The flight, the rental car counter, the scenic coastal drive, all of it happened in a fog of anticipation and dread. The GPS guided me through increasingly rural landscapes until I reached the village, a picturesque collection of weathered buildings perched on the edge of the Atlantic. Nathan's house, Daniel's house, was on the outskirts, a modest blue clapboard structure with a wraparound porch, not unlike our home in Mapleton. I parked across the street, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. What was I doing here? What did I expect to happen? I had no script for this unprecedented moment, no roadmap for confronting a husband who had returned from the dead. I was about to start the car again, to flee back to the safety of my known life, when the front door opened. A man stepped out onto the porch, shading his eyes against the late afternoon sun. Nathan. Older, grayer, but undeniably Nathan. He looked directly at my car, and even from this distance, I could see the moment of recognition. He froze, hand still raised to his brow, his posture reflecting the same shock I felt coursing through my body. For a long moment we remained like that, me in the car, him on the porch, 20 years and 1,000 unspoken words between us. Then, slowly, he raised his hand in a tentative wave. It was such a normal gesture, so incongruously ordinary, in this extraordinary situation, that it broke the spell holding me in place. I got out of the car on legs that felt unnervingly steady given the circumstances. I crossed the street and walked up the gravel path to the house that had been Nathan's refuge, while I rebuilt a life from the wreckage he left behind. He came down the steps to meet me, stopping a respectful distance away. Up close, I could see that his eyes were the same, that particular shade of hazel that had always reminded me of autumn leaves. They were filled with trepidation now, and something else I couldn't quite name. Relief, perhaps. Or hope. Alice, he said, my name barely audible on his lips. Nathan, I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. Or should I call you Daniel now? A shadow crossed his face. Nathan, he said. I've always been Nathan to myself. Daniel is just a shell. We stood in awkward silence, the magnitude of the moment making small talk impossible. Finally, he gestured toward the house. Would you like to come in? Or we could talk out here if that's more comfortable for you. I considered the options. Going inside felt too intimate, too much like accepting his new reality. But standing in his front yard felt too exposed for the conversation we needed to have. Is there somewhere else we could go? I asked. Somewhere? Neutral? He nodded, understanding immediately. There's a small cafe in town. Or there's a beach about a mile down the road. It's usually deserted this time of year. The beach, I decided. Public enough to feel safe, private enough for honesty. We took my rental car, the silence between us thick with unasked questions. Nathan directed me to a small turnoff that led to a pebbly shore, the gray Atlantic stretching endlessly before us. It reminded me painfully of our sanctuary cove in Bermuda, though this beach was northern and austere rather than tropical and lush. We sat on driftwood logs positioned as makeshift benches, the sound of waves filling the spaces between our words. For a while, neither of us spoke. I watched a gull dive into the water and emerge with a small fish, its wings flashing silver against the darkening sky. I read your letter, I finally said, and the files on the USB drive. Nathan nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I wasn't sure you would find it, or if you did, that you'd believe it. I'm still not sure I believe all of it, I admitted. It seems fantastical, like something from a spy novel, not real life, not our life. I know. His voice was heavy with regret. I couldn't believe it either at first. That's part of why I was so distant those last months. I was trying to process it all, trying to find a way out that didn't involve leaving you and Lydia. I turned to look at him directly. But you did leave us. You let us think you were dead, Nathan, for 20 years. He flinched at the accusation, but didn't deny it. Yes, and I've hated myself every day for it. Then why? The question burst from me, carrying 2 decades of grief and confusion. Why not take us with you? Why not tell me the truth? They were watching everything, he said, his voice low and urgent. Our house, our phones, our computers. The only way my extraction worked was because they believed I had committed suicide. If there had been any hint that I was planning to disappear, or that you knew anything about it, they would have intervened. And their interventions were permanent, Alice. A chill ran through me at his words. You really believe they would have hurt us? I know they would have. His certainty was unnerving. The program I helped develop was worth billions to them. The wrong person learning about how it was being used, who it was being sold to. They wouldn't have hesitated to eliminate that threat. So you sacrificed our family to save us? I said, trying to wrap my mind around his reasoning. To save your lives, he corrected gently. Yes. It was the hardest choice I've ever made. But if I had to make it again, knowing what I knew then, I would do the same thing. I picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in my hand, feeling its cool weight. When did you decide to contact me now? After all this time? Nathan sighed, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. They're gone, Alice. The company, the program, the people who threatened us, they've been disbanded. A whistleblower. Not me, someone with more courage. Came forward 3 years ago. There were investigations, indictments. It made international news. I frowned, trying to remember any such story. I don't recall hearing about it. They kept the company. Name out of the headlines. It was reported as a tech security firm with government contracts. But it was Helios. The danger is past now. And it took you 3 years to reach out? I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. I was afraid, he admitted, his honesty disarming. Not of them anymore, but of this moment. of facing you after what I'd done, of learning that you'd moved on and were happier without me, of discovering that my sacrifice had been for nothing. The raw vulnerability in his voice touched something in me that I thought had long since hardened over. But I wasn't ready to offer absolution, not yet. Lydia doesn't know, I said, about any of this. She still thinks you killed yourself. Pain flashed across his face. How is she? She's a surgeon now. Brilliant, dedicated. She has your focus, your analytical mind. I paused, then added, she also has your absence in her life, a father-shaped hole that's defined her in ways you can't imagine. He closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the blow. I've followed her career from afar. I saw the announcement when she was accepted to medical school. I drove to Boston once, just to see her from a distance. I couldn't risk closer contact. The image of Nathan watching our daughter secretly, a phantom father in the shadows, filled me with a complicated mix of anger and pity. She deserves to know the truth, I said firmly. Yes, he agreed. But that's your decision to make, not mine. I forfeited that right when I left. We sat in silence again, the weight of 20 years pressing down between us. The sun was setting. Now, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It would have been beautiful under different circumstances. What do you want, Nathan? I finally asked. Why reach out now? What did you hope would happen? He considered the question carefully before answering. Honestly, I didn't have expectations. I just couldn't bear the separation anymore. I thought you deserved to know that I hadn't chosen to leave you, not in the way you believed. That I never stopped loving you. That every day apart from you and Lydia has been a kind of living death. His words hung in the salt air between us, heavy with emotion. I built a life after you, I said quietly. It wasn't the one I wanted, the one we planned. But it's mine. I earned it through years of putting one foot in front of the other when all I wanted was to collapse. I know, he said. I'm not asking you to give that up. Then what are you asking for? He turned to face me fully, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that was achingly familiar. A chance, Alice, not to reclaim what we lost. That's impossible. But to see if there's anything left worth salvaging. To know you again, if you'll allow it. To be known. I looked away, out to where the darkening ocean met the sky. The enormity of what he was proposing, of what I was even considering, was overwhelming. I can't answer that now, I said finally. I need time, space to think. He nodded, accepting my response without argument. Of course, I've waited 20 years. I can wait longer. We sat as night fell completely, the stars emerging one by one above us. In the darkness, with the sound of waves providing a constant backdrop, Nathan cautiously began to tell me about his life in exile, the series of small towns, the odd jobs, the loneliness. I listened without interrupting, trying to imagine this solitary existence so different from the life we had shared. When the chill became too much to ignore, we walked back to the car in silence. I drove him to his house, stopping at the curb, rather than pulling into the driveway, a small but significant boundary. Will you be staying in town? He asked as he opened the car door. I have a room at the inn for tonight, I said. I'm flying back tomorrow afternoon. He nodded, disappointment visible even in the dim light. Can I see you again before you leave? I hesitated, torn between self-protection and the pull of unfinished business. I'll call you in the morning, I said finally, if I'm ready. Thank you for coming, Alice. For listening. He stepped out of the car, but leaned down to add, whatever you decide, knowing you're out there, living well, it's enough. But as I drove away, watching his figure grow smaller in the rearview mirror, I wasn't sure it would ever be enough for me. Not anymore. Not now that I knew the truth. In my hotel room, I lay awake for hours, replaying our conversation, weighing his explanations against the years of pain his disappearance had caused. The Nathan I had loved was honest to a fault, principled, devoted to family. The story he told aligned with that character, a man making an impossible choice to protect those he loved. But 20 years was a long time. People changed. I had changed. The woman who had loved Nathan unconditionally no longer existed. In her place was someone more cautious, more self-reliant, more aware of life's fragility. Could we build something new from the ashes of our past? Did I even want to try? I fell asleep without answers, the sound of waves still echoing in my mind. Morning came with a clarity I hadn't expected. I woke before dawn, the unfamiliar bed in the quaint Nova Scotia inn creaking as I rose. I wrapped myself in the complimentary robe and moved to the window, watching as the first pale light crept across the harbor. Fishing boats were already heading out, their running lights like fireflies skimming the dark water. I hadn't called Nathan yet. The phone sat on the nightstand, his number ready to dial, but I hesitated. Yesterday's conversation had left me, emotionally drained, caught between the lingering anger of 20 years and the undeniable relief of knowing he hadn't chosen to die, hadn't abandoned us out of despair or disaffection. I showered and dressed, then went downstairs to the inn's small dining room. The elderly proprietor, Mrs. Caldwell, served me strong coffee and homemade blueberry scones, chatting amiably about the weather and fishing season. I nodded and smiled, in all the right places, but my mind was elsewhere. "You're American, aren't you, dear?" she asked, refilling my cup without waiting for a response. "Not many tourists this time of year. What brings you to our little corner of the world?" I hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I'm visiting an old friend." "Ah." Her knowing smile suggested she thought it was more than friendship. "Would that be Daniel Winters by any chance? The gentleman who lives in the blue house on Osprey Point?" I nearly choked on my coffee. "You know him?" "Small village, dear. Everyone knows everyone." She settled into the chair across from me, clearly ready for a gossip. "Quiet man, keeps to himself mostly. Been here, must be nearly 10 years now. Arrived like he was running from something, though he's mellowed. Some since. Good neighbor, though. Helped my Herbert fix our roof last winter without being asked." I digested this information, this glimpse of Nathan's, Daniel's, life here. "What else can you tell me about him?" Mrs. Caldwell tilted her head, studying me with shrewd eyes. "Not married, no lady friends that anyone's seen. Works from home, something with computers, I gather. Walks the beach most evenings, rain or shine." She paused. Sad eyes, the kind that come from losing something precious. Her words hit me with unexpected force. Nathan had lost something precious, us, his family, his identity, his entire whether his choice was justified or not, he had paid a steep price for it. "Thank you," I said quietly. "That's helpful to know." After breakfast, I walked along the harbor, watching fishermen unload their morning catch as gulls wheeled overhead. The village was picturesque in the way of places that exist primarily for practical purposes rather than tourism. Authentic, weathered, resilient. I could see why Nathan had chosen it. Remote without being isolated. Beautiful but not flashy. A place where a quiet man could blend in, become part of the landscape without drawing undue attention. Finally, I took out my phone and dialed his number. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting with the phone in his hand. "Alice?" "Yes," I said, suddenly uncertain of what to say next. I'm still in town." "I'm glad." His voice was careful, measured, giving nothing. "Boy, would you like to meet again?" I took a deep breath. "Yes, but not at the beach. Not at your house either. There's a lighthouse about 20 minutes north of here, he suggested. The grounds are open to visitors. It's peaceful, private enough to talk but still public. That sounds good. I checked my watch. I need to leave for the airport by 1. Could we meet at 10? I'll be there, he promised. I remember how she used to call it the crying tree, he said softly. She thought it looked sad. She was a perceptive child, I agreed. Still is, as an adult. We continued walking, the conversation flowing, more naturally now as shared memories created bridges between past and present. Not all the memories were happy. We touched briefly on the difficult months before his disappearance, his depression, my confusion. But we didn't shy away from them either. I've been seeing a therapist, Nathan volunteered as we sat on a bench overlooking the river. For years now, actually, working through everything. The guilt, especially. That's good, I said, genuinely pleased to hear it. Has it helped? Some days more than others. She suggested I write you letters, even if I never sent them. I filled notebooks, hundreds of conversations we never had. I glanced at him. What did these phantom letters say? He gazed out at the water. That I was sorry, that I thought of you every day, that I wondered who you had become, who Lydia was growing into. He paused. That I hoped you had found happiness, even as the selfish part of me hoped you hadn't fully moved on. His honesty disarmed me. I dated, I admitted. A few men over the years. Nothing lasted. I told myself it was because they weren't right for me, but maybe I was afraid of being left again. I'm sorry, he said simply, for all of it. We sat in silence for a while, watching a pair of ducks navigate the gentle current. The weight of the past was still there, but it felt slightly less crushing now that we had acknowledged it together. Would you like to have dinner? I asked eventually. Not at the house, but there's a new place on Maple Street that's supposed to be good. I'd like that, he said, a tentative smile forming. Very much. That evening marked a subtle shift in our cautious reconnection. Over pasta and wine, we talked not about the past but about the present, books we'd read recently, films we'd enjoyed, places we'd visited. We discovered new commonalities and noted the divergences in our tastes and perspectives that 20 years of separate lives had created. It wasn't the easy intimacy we had once shared, but it wasn't the strained politeness of strangers either. It was something in between, the tentative foundation of a new relationship built atop the ruins of the old. After dinner, I drove him back to his hotel. In the car, he turned to me with uncharacteristic hesitation. Alice, I'd like to see Lydia, if she's willing. Not this trip. I know it's too soon. But someday. Do you think that might be possible? I chose my words carefully. She's still processing everything. She has questions, anger, grief to work through. But yes, I think eventually she might be ready. She's asked about you, about our conversations. Hope flickered across his face. That's more than I deserve. Maybe, I agreed. But Lydia has always had a capacity for understanding that surpasses most people. She gets that from you, actually. He looked away, emotion making, his profile tight. Thank you for raising her to be so whole, despite everything. She raised herself in many ways, I said truthfully. All I did was try not to get in her way. At the hotel, we shared an awkward moment of uncertainty. A handshake too formal, a hug too intimate for where we stood. In the end, he simply touched my arm lightly. Thank you for today, Alice. For all of it. I nodded, finding myself unexpectedly reluctant to say goodbye. I'll see you tomorrow? Before your train? I'd like that, he said, and the simple sincerity in his voice made something shift inside me. a small but significant rearrangement of the emotional landscape I had inhabited for so long. As I drove home to the house that had once been ours, I realized that the anger I had carried for 20 years had begun to transform. Not disappear, it would never fully vanish, but evolve into something more nuanced, something that left room for other feelings to grow alongside it. Forgiveness, I was discovering, wasn't a single moment of absolution, but a gradual process of understanding, of choosing every day to move forward rather than remain anchored to the past. Nathan and I might never recapture what we had lost, but perhaps we could build something new from the fragments, something wiser, more resilient, and ultimately more truthful than before. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating, like standing at the edge of an unfamiliar sea. I didn't know yet if I would dive in or retreat to the safety of the shore. But for the first time in 20 years, I felt the pull of possibility, the whisper of a future I hadn't dared to imagine. And for now, that was enough. 6 months after Nathan's first visit to Mapleton, our cautious reconnection had evolved into something I couldn't quite name, not quite a relationship in the traditional sense, but more than friendship. We spoke weekly by phone, exchanged emails about our daily lives, and he had visited twice more, each time staying at the downtown hotel but spending increasingly comfortable hours in my company. With each interaction, the sharp edges of my anger dulled slightly, making space for other emotions to emerge. Curiosity about the life he had built in exile, appreciation for the man he had become, more thoughtful, less certain, humbled by his experiences, and sometimes, in unguarded moments, flashes of the connection that had once bound us together so completely. On a crisp October afternoon, I was pruning the hydrangeas in my front garden when Diana, my neighbor from across the street, wandered over with a plate of banana bread and thinly disguised curiosity. "You've had a visitor a few times now," she observed, handing me the plate. "Handsome silver fox? New boyfriend?" I smiled noncommittally. Diana had moved to the neighborhood 12 years ago, long after Nathan's disappearance. She knew I was a widow, but none of the complicated details. "Just an old friend," I replied, accepting the banana bread. "Thank you for this." "Must be a good friend," Diana persisted. "The way he looks at you. Well, let's just say if I were 20 years younger and not happily married to Ron, I'd be interested." I felt a flush creeping up my neck. "It's complicated," I admitted. Diana laughed. "The good ones always are, honey. Just be careful with your heart. You deserve someone who appreciates what a catch you are." As she walked back across the street, I pondered her words. Was I being careful with my heart? Or was I already tumbling back into emotional territory I had sworn to approach with caution? The truth was, spending time with Nathan had begun to feel dangerously natural. Our shared history provided a foundation that no new relationship could match, while the years apart gave us new perspectives to share, new stories to tell. It was disorienting, like reading a beloved book where familiar chapters were interspersed with entirely new ones. I was still contemplating this when my phone rang. Lydia's name flashed on the screen. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered, setting down my pruning shears. "How are you?" "I've been thinking, Mom." Her voice was steady but tense. "About Dad. I think I'm ready to see him." My heart skipped. After months of careful neutrality whenever Nathan was mentioned, this was a significant shift. "Are you sure?" "No," she admitted with a small laugh. "I'm terrified, actually. But I've been talking it through with my therapist, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion. I need to see him face to face, to ask my own questions, I don't know, to make him real again, I guess." "I understand," I said softly. "Do you want me to arrange it? Or would you prefer to contact him directly? Could you set it up? Maybe somewhere neutral? Not your house or my apartment?" Of course. When were you thinking? The sooner the better before I lose my nerve. I have next weekend off. We arranged the details, a meeting at a quiet cafe in Boston, halfway between Mapleton and the hospital where Lydia worked. After we hung up, I sat for a long moment on the garden bench, absorbing the implications of this development. When I called Nathan that evening to relay Lydia's request, his reaction was a mixture of joy and terror. She wants to see me? His voice cracked slightly. Really? Yes, I confirmed. But Nathan, you need to understand. This isn't necessarily forgiveness or reconciliation. She has questions, things she needs to say to you directly. It might be difficult. I know, he said quickly. I'm not expecting a happy reunion. Just the chance to see her, to explain in my own words. It's more than I hoped for. We made the arrangements and I offered to be present as a buffer if Lydia wanted, but she declined, preferring to face this milestone alone. This is something I need to do myself, Mom, she explained. I love you, but your presence would change the dynamic. I need to see him as an adult, not as a child with her mother protecting her. I respected her decision, though it left me anxious about how the meeting would unfold. Lydia had her father's analytical mind, but my emotional intensity, a combination that could lead to profound understanding or devastating confrontation. The day of their meeting, I tried to distract myself with work, but found it impossible to focus. I kept checking my phone, half expecting a message from one or both of them saying it had all gone terribly wrong. But no message came. It was nearly 9 p.m. when Lydia finally called. How did it go? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral despite my concern. There was a long pause. It was intense, she finally said, but not in the way I expected. What do you mean? She sighed, a sound that contained both exhaustion and something like wonder. I had this whole speech prepared, all the things I've wanted to say to him for 20 years. How angry I was, how abandoned I felt, how his choices shaped my life in ways I'm still discovering. But when I saw him sitting there, looking so nervous and so, I don't know, diminished somehow, it all came out differently. How so? I still said those things, but not as accusations. More like statements of fact. This is what happened. This is how it affected me. This is who I became because of it. She paused. And he listened, Mom. Really listened. He didn't defend himself or try to justify anything. He just received it. All of it. I closed my eyes, picturing the scene. My strong, articulate daughter finally confronting the father whose absence had shaped her life. Nathan absorbing her words with the humility that had come at such a high cost. Did he explain? About why he left? Yes, the same story he told you. The surveillance software. The threats. His belief that disappearing was the only way to keep us safe. She was quiet for a moment. I believe him, I think. Or at least, I believe he believed it. Whether there were other options he couldn't see at the time, that's harder to say. What happens now? I asked gently. Between you two? I don't know, she admitted. We agreed to email. Baby steps. I'm not ready to call him Dad again or include him in my life in any significant way. But I'm also not walking away completely. There's too much I still want to understand. After we hung up, I sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the October sky. I felt a profound sense of gratitude mixed with lingering sadness, grateful that Lydia had found the strength to face Nathan, sad for all the years that could never be recovered. My phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. Thank you for raising such an extraordinary person. She is everything I could have hoped, for and more than I deserve. I stared at the message, tears blurring my vision. It was the most fundamental truth of our situation. Lydia was extraordinary. and neither of us fully deserved her grace. Yet she offered it anyway, not out of obligation but out of her own strength and wisdom. She makes her own choices. I texted back. Always has. Like her mother, came his immediate reply. I smiled through my tears, recognizing the truth in his words. Lydia had indeed inherited my stubborn independence, though she wielded it with more discernment than I had at her age. That night, lying in bed, I reflected on how far we had all come since that birthday card had appeared under my door. The shock and anger of discovery had gradually given way to a more complex emotional landscape, one where hurt and healing existed side by side, where the past informed but no longer dictated the present. For the first time, I allowed myself to truly consider the possibility of a future that included Nathan, not as the husband who had left, but as someone new yet familiar, a man shaped by regret and resilience in equal measure. The thought both thrilled and terrified me. Winter arrived with unusual ferocity that year, burying Mapleton under record snowfall and forcing a kind of hibernation on the town. Nathan had returned to Nova Scotia after his meeting with Lydia, continuing our long-distance communication while giving both of us space to process the evolving dynamics of our unusual situation. In late January, a nor'easter knocked out power. Throughout the region, I was prepared with generators, flashlights, and a well-stocked pantry, but the isolation of those dark, cold days left ample time for reflection. Sitting by the fireplace, wrapped in blankets with only flickering flames for light, I found myself thinking about resilience, not just my own, but the inherent human capacity to weather storms both literal and metaphorical. 20 years ago, Nathan's disappearance had felt like an extinction-level event in my life, a catastrophe from which recovery seemed impossible. Yet here I was, not just surviving, but living a life of meaning, purpose, and increasingly joy. There was a profound lesson in that journey, one that had nothing to do with Nathan's return and everything to do with the strength I had discovered within myself. Whether our rekindled connection evolved into something lasting or eventually faded, that strength would remain. When the power finally returned after 3 days, I called Nathan with a proposition. "I've been thinking," I said without preamble. "The basement needs to be renovated." There was a pause, then a cautious, "Okay?" from his end of the line. "The space where you hid the lockbox, I want to transform it. Not cover it up or pretend it wasn't there, but repurpose it, make it into something new." "What did you have in mind?" he asked. "A studio," I said. "I've been doing some watercolor painting in my spare time, just amateur stuff, but it brings me joy. I could use a dedicated space with good light, storage for supplies." "That sounds wonderful, Alice," he said, genuine enthusiasm warming. His voice. "You always had an artistic eye. It's one of the things that made you such a talented landscape architect." "The thing is," I continued, gathering my courage, "I could use some help with the construction part. Building shelves, installing better lighting, that sort of thing." "Are you asking me to help?" The surprise in his voice was evident. "Yes," I said simply. "If you're willing, it feels appropriate somehow, transforming a space that held secrets into something open and creative." There was a weighted silence before he responded. "I'd be honored, Alice. Just tell me when." 2 weeks later, Nathan arrived with a car full of tools and building supplies. We had agreed that he would stay at the house this time, in the IE guest room, to make the project more manageable. It marked a significant shift in our tentative rapprochement, bringing him back into the domestic space we had once shared as a family. The work was both practical and symbolic, clearing out the basement, removing the false panel that had hidden his secrets, opening up the space to natural light by enlarging the small windows. We worked side by side, sometimes in comfortable silence, sometimes sharing stories from our years apart. One evening, covered in dust from sanding drywall, we took a break to eat sandwiches on the basement steps. Nathan looked around at the half-transformed space, his expression contemplative. "It's strange," he said. "Being back here, changing this room that held so much. Darkness. It feels like absolution I haven't earned." I considered his words. "Maybe it's not about earning," I suggested. "Maybe it's about choosing a different path forward. Both of us." He nodded slowly. "I spent so many years defined by fear. Fear of being found. Fear of the consequences of my actions. Fear that you and Lydia would never understand why I left. I let it consume me." He glanced at me. "You chose a different way. You rebuilt. You thrived, despite everything." "Not right away," I admitted. "There were years of just existing. Breathing in and out because I had to, for Lydia's sake, if nothing else. The rebuilding came later, and it wasn't a straight line. There were setbacks, days when grief felt as fresh as it had in the beginning." "What changed?" he asked quietly. I thought about it, wanting to give him an honest answer. "I stopped. Waiting," I said finally. "Waiting for closure, for answers, for the pain to make sense. I accepted that some questions might never be answered, some wounds might never fully heal. And paradoxically, that acceptance freed me to move forward." Nathan's eyes held mine, recognition flickering in their depths. "That's what I'm trying to learn now," he said. "How to live with unresolved pain, my own and the pain I caused others. How to accept that some damage can't be undone, only acknowledged and used as a foundation for something new." "It's not easy," I said, reaching over to squeeze his hand, briefly. "But it's possible." That moment of connection, simple as it was, shifted something between us. The careful distance we had maintained began to dissolve, replaced by a growing comfort in each other's presence. We still had boundaries, emotional and physical, but they felt less like barriers and more like necessary frameworks for whatever was emerging between us. By the end of the week, the studio was taking shape. Walls painted a soft cream that reflected the northern light, built-in shelves for art supplies, a large work table positioned to capture the best natural illumination. Nathan had even designed a clever storage system for canvases and papers, remembering how I had always appreciated efficient organization in my workspace. On his last day, as we stood surveying our completed project, I felt a swell of emotion that caught me by surprise. This room represented more than just a functional renovation. It was physical proof that painful histories could be transformed, that spaces holding secrets and sorrow could be reimagined for joy and creativity. "What do you think?" Nathan asked, gesturing around the studio. "It's perfect," I said sincerely. "Better than I imagined." He smiled, clearly pleased with my reaction. "I'm glad. It suits you. Bright, open, full of possibility." The compliment warmed me, partly because I recognized its truth. I was different now, more open to possibility, more willing to embrace uncertainty than I had been before the birthday card arrived and upended my carefully constructed life. "Thank you for helping," I said, turning to face him directly. "Not just with the studio, but with everything. Answering my questions, giving me space when I needed it, being patient with the process." "Alice," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I'm the one who should be thanking you. For even considering letting me back into your life in any capacity. For not shutting the door completely when you had every right to." We stood there in the transformed basement, the air between us charged with unspoken feelings. For a moment, I thought he might reach for me, and part of me wanted him to. But he maintained the respectful distance that had characterized our interactions since his return. "I should finish packing," he said finally. "My train leaves at 4. I nodded, both relieved and disappointed by the return to practicality. "I'll drive you to the station." Later, as we said goodbye on the platform, the awkwardness that had marked our early reunions was noticeably absent. In its place was something more nuanced, a comfortable familiarity tinged with the awareness that we were still finding our way forward. "Lydia mentioned she might visit Nova Scotia in the spring," Nathan said as his train was announced, "for a medical conference in Halifax. She said she might have time to drive up to the village afterward." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased that their cautious reconnection was continuing. "She didn't tell me that." "She just emailed yesterday," he explained. "I think she's still getting used to the idea herself." "She's brave," I said. "Braver than I was at her age." "She gets that from you," Nathan countered. "Your courage was always quieter than mine, but deeper too. More enduring." The compliment caught me off guard, making me look away briefly to compose myself. When I met his eyes again, I saw a question there that neither of us was quite ready to voice. "Will you come back to Mapleton?" I asked instead. "Maybe in the spring?" "If you want me to," he said simply. "I do," I admitted, the words feeling like a significant concession. He nodded, relief and happiness brightening his expression. "Then I will." As his train pulled away, I remained on the platform, watching until it disappeared around a bend. My feelings were complicated, a mixture of anticipation, lingering caution, and something increasingly like hope. Spring arrived with its usual unpredictability in New England. Warm days followed by unexpected frosts, cherry blossoms appearing, and then shivering under late snow showers. I spent increasing time in my new studio, discovering a talent for watercolor landscapes that surprised and delighted me. There was something meditative about capturing the subtle shifts of light and shadow, the delicate balance of color and form. Nathan and I continued our long-distance communication, but with a new ease that felt promising. We shared the ordinary details of our days, recommended books to each other, sometimes spent hours on the phone discussing everything from politics to philosophy to the merits of various pasta shapes. It was, in many ways, the kind of friendship we had once had before romance, a meeting of minds that formed the foundation for deeper connection. Lydia did indeed visit Nova Scotia, spending 2 days with Nathan after her conference. She called me afterward, her voice thoughtful as she described the experience. "It's strange, Mom," she said. "He's so familiar and so unknown at the same time. I see gestures, expressions, ways of thinking that are obviously part of who I am, inherited from him. But then there are these moments when I realize I'm sitting across from a stranger." "Is it difficult?" I asked. "Yes and no. It's clarifying in a way. I spent so many years with this idealized memory of him, the perfect dad from my childhood, frozen in time. Now I'm seeing him as a real person, flawed and complex. It's harder in some ways, but more honest." Her insight struck me profoundly. I, too, had been navigating the disconnect between memory and reality, between the Nathan I had mourned and the man who had returned, bearing the marks of his 20-year exile. "Do you think you can forgive him?" I asked, the question that had been circling in my own mind for months. She was quiet for a moment. "I think I already have, in a way," she said finally. "Not because what he did was right, but because holding on to the anger was hurting me more than him. Forgiveness isn't about erasing what happened. It's about refusing to let it define my future." Her wisdom, hard-earned through years of therapy and self-reflection, moved me deeply. At 36, Lydia possessed an emotional intelligence that had taken me decades longer to develop. "What about you, Mom?" she asked, turning the question back on me. "Have you forgiven him?" I considered this carefully. "I'm getting there," I said honestly. "It's a process, not a destination. Some days I feel I've made peace with everything. Other days, the hurt feels fresh again. But yes, I think forgiveness is happening, whether I consciously choose it or not. And beyond forgiveness? She probed gently. Is there something else developing between you two? The directness of her question caught me off guard. I don't know, I admitted. It's complicated. Mom, she said with a touch of fond exasperation, you're both in your 60s. Life is short. If there's still something there worth exploring, don't let fear hold you back. I laughed, surprised to be receiving relationship advice from my daughter. When did you get so wise? Must be those good genes you and Dad gave me, she replied. And the casual way she said Dad, the first time she had referred to Nathan that way since learning he was alive, felt like a significant milestone. After our call, I sat in my studio, watching the spring twilight soften the garden outside the window. Lydia's words echoed in my mind. Life is short. Don't let fear hold you back. It was true. At 58, I had already lived more years than I likely had left. Did I want to spend those remaining years in cautious isolation, protected from potential hurt, but also from deeper connection? Nathan was scheduled to visit again in 2 weeks. As I contemplated his return, I recognized that we were approaching a crossroads, continuing our careful friendship or acknowledging the deeper currents that had begun to flow between us again. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. After 20 years of believing my heart was permanently closed, the possibility of reopening it felt like both a risk and a gift. Could I trust again, not just Nathan, but my own? Judgment? Could I believe in second chances after such profound betrayal? As I pondered these questions, I picked up my paintbrush and began working on a new piece, a watercolor of Sanctuary Cove, the beach in Bermuda that had once been our private paradise. I worked from memory, capturing the turquoise water, the sheltering cliffs, the sense of secluded peace that had made it so special. When it was finished, I sat back and studied the painting. It wasn't perfect, watercolors rarely are, but it captured something essential about that place and time. A moment of pure happiness preserved in pigment and paper. I decided then that I would give it to Nathan when he visited, not as a nostalgic gesture looking backward, but as an acknowledgement that beautiful moments, once experienced, remain. Part of us even when circumstances change. They become touchstones, reminders of our capacity for joy even in the midst of pain. The evening before Nathan's arrival, I stood in the basement studio, placing the framed watercolor on the work table where he would see it. The room that had once held secrets now held creation. Paintings in various stages of completion, sketches pinned to boards, art books stacked on shelves. It was a space of transparency, of possibility. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. Silver-streaked auburn hair, lines of experience around my eyes and mouth, shoulders straight with the confidence that comes from surviving what once seemed insurmountable. I barely resembled the younger woman who had stood in this same basement 20 years ago, searching frantically for answers to her husband's disappearance. That woman had been broken by circumstance, her sense of self shattered along with her marriage. But I was not that woman anymore. I had rebuilt myself piece by piece, discovering strengths I never knew I possessed, creating a life of meaning and purpose from the ruins of what was lost. Whatever happened next with Nathan, reconciliation or redefined boundaries, would be my choice, made from a position of wholeness rather than need. The realization filled me with a profound sense of peace. The basement was no longer a place of hidden truths and painful memories. It had become, like me, transformed by time and intention into something new, something that honored the past without being imprisoned by it. Tomorrow, Nathan would arrive, and we would take another step in our complicated journey together. I didn't know where that journey would lead, but for the first time in decades, I was genuinely curious to find out. And that curiosity, that openness to an unwritten future, felt like the most profound victory of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.